Hello, everybody. Welcome to this really important and amazing conversation about the launch of CANCEA's report for universal basic income in Canada. Before we begin this important conversation, it's essential to ground it in the acknowledgement that from wherever we are joining this meeting today, for those who are non-Indigenous, we are settlers and we are here on this land. The city in which I sit today is situated upon the ancestral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee Confederacy land, as determined by Dish with One Spoon Treaty. With that agreement, it is also an area with long-standing relationships with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the Six Nations of the Grand River. Almost all of us here today are somewhere on Turtle Island. If you know the traditional name or the territory upon which you are seated, please say it out loud or write it within the chat or say it within the silence of your heart. We are grateful to the Indigenous people of Turtle Island who have cared for these lands since time immemorial. We hold our hands up to their amazing resistance, resilience, and strength in the face of ongoing displacement and colonial violence. To acknowledge these lands is to take one step in demonstrating our commitment to beginning the process of dismantling the ongoing legacy of settler colonialism. May we bring that same commitment and spirit of truth-seeking and reconciliation today and always. So, I'm very, very excited for this event. We're celebrating this brand new report that is giving us a first look at what the economic impacts of a basic income are going to be. So we have some really amazing speakers today, and I want to just give a little brief intro for all of them. We have Paul Smetanin, who is the president and CEO of the Canadian Centre for Economic Analysis, or CANCEA. This is the independent research organization that's behind this landmark new report released earlier this week. We're also very honored to have Senator Hugh Segal join us. He is a conservative senator who has had a long and dedicated career in Canadian politics and is a trailblazer for basic income advocacy in Canada. We also have with us Floyd Marinescu, who is the founder of UBI Works, the CEO and co-founder of C4 Media, which provides software development and events to 1.2 million people online. We also have Brett House, the vice president and Deputy Chief Economist, my apologies, at Scotiabank. We have many amazing people here, and I'm very excited about all of this. But before we begin, we actually have a very brief message from a very special surprise guest. So I'll let Alex put that person on.
Sorry, just want to make sure the audio is going through. 1 sec.
All good.
It's possible some people may not know who that is.
Oh, okay. Well, I can briefly tell while Alex is getting ready. We're actually going to be watching a short video from Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang was a Democratic candidate for the president of the United States, and he ran on a platform for basic income. Floyd, I'm sure you know more about Andrew than I do, as you're good friends with him.
Yeah, Andrew's, we supported each other, supported him early in his presidential run when I was running tech conferences in New York and San Francisco. I was really honored to consider him a friend and confidant on this journey towards a country, a world with basic income. So he's very much a fan of what we're doing. And, UBI Works, for those of you who followed us, talks a lot about technology and the impact of technology on the labor force. So Andrew Yang's a natural ally of our work in Canada. Very excited to hear him, his remarks about this report coming in a moment.
And we are ready to go.
Let's go.
Awesome.
Hello, Canada! I have great news for you about a new report coming up that will change the game for universal basic income activists in Canada and the States and everywhere. A new report by the Canadian Centre for Economic Analysis shows that basic income could grow the economy and create hundreds of thousands of jobs sustainably while ending poverty and supporting working Canadians at the same time. As we emerge from this crisis, we have to know that 4 in 10 jobs that have been lost will not come back, and businesses are continuing to close right and left and automate more and more work during this recession. We need to find a way to get money into the hands of our people in order to jumpstart our recovery and build a trickle-up economy, and this report shows that universal basic income will do exactly that. Just want to say congratulations and thank you to UBI Works, who sponsored this work, and my close friend Floyd Marinescu. Please support his work and this work and share the results, because now Canadians can show that basic income will grow the economy, and universal basic income works, has the data to prove it. They did the math, baby. Congratulations, Floyd, and the whole team.
Well, I've been looking at UBI for a while, and in my opinion, this is the most comprehensive report dealing with the situation, with the way to finance it and the implications of this issue. I believe also that it illustrates the fact that it's not really about the charity. It's not about transferring income. It's more than that. It's enhancing the overall ability of the economy to grow, and therefore productivity that will enhance everybody's else standard of living. That's why I think this report is important. It must be a starting point for any policymaker that is interested in solving the problem.
Great, thank you so much for that. And then that was Andrew Yang, and then that second video was Benjamin Tal, who is the Chief Deputy Economist at CIBC. Yes, so next we are going to have remarks from Paul Smetanin, who is the President and CEO of the Canadian Centre for Economic Analysis, CANCEA. CANCEA is an interdisciplinary research organization dedicated to objective, independent, and evidence-based analysis and communication. In 2018, CANCEA published a report on the economic contributions of the Canada Child Benefit, demonstrating that the program is already working to grow the economy while keeping Canadian families out of poverty. Very excited to have you, Paul. I'm very excited to hear what you have to say. Take it away.
Thank you, Jessie, and good afternoon, everyone. UBI Works approached us to independently and objectively evaluate 2 programs, basic income programs, and understand what are the benefits to families receiving payments under the 2 proposed income programs. And secondly, what potential economic impacts of the programs could be, and how these impacts are actually shaped by the way a basic income program is funded. And that essentially brings us to the key conclusion from the analysis, is that, you know, while basic income can be justified, you know, you can think of it as being justified on a social and equitable grounds, it can also be thought of as an investment, as a desirable side effect of the basic income program, provided it is funded appropriately, can grow the economy beyond its cost in the long term. And I think that's an important consideration. And so in terms of the programs evaluated, we looked at what we call a GMI program, which was modeled after the Ontario Basic Income Pilot, but with a higher benefit amounts, and essentially it's $24,000 per individuals and $34,700 for couples, and it applies to adults under the age of 65. And then there was another program which was evaluated, the Dividend Plus GMI program, and that's essentially proposed by UBI Works under the name Recovery UBI, which guarantees a minimum annual income of $24,000 for individuals and $36,000 for couples, including a $6,000 annual dividend that's paid to all adults. So in terms of benefits, a lot of people in the audience will understand the benefits in terms of the basic income beyond the economics. Clearly, the benefits of these 2 programs, about 3.2 million families are lifted above the poverty line. About 7.3 million families earning below $30,000 per annum are all significant beneficiaries. This represents about, for income families, there's about 2.3 million families in the lowest income bracket that would receive 240% more in terms of what their current disposable income would be. Now, the costs of a UBI program are significant, and it's not a trivial contemplation, given that the cost of these two programs could range between 5% and 10% of the economy. Now we turn our attention to economic impacts, and essentially the study and the calculations that we were able to perform. We're first to be able to establish that a basic income program can be economically sustainable. The sustainability of a basic income program, however, does depend upon how it is funded. And sustainable in the report means that all government debt used to fund the program is paid down by economic growth over a reasonable time frame. Funding sources that were considered could either be from different households across the country, businesses, and or government debt, or any combination of those three. Now, if you have an over-reliance, if you can avoid an over-reliance upon debt funding, then a basic income program could, by the 5th year, result in the economy being a growth of 1.6 to 3.2% larger in real terms. And that's looking at a contribution of about $40 to $79 billion to the economy. In terms of the number of jobs, it could help grow the economy by 300,000 to close to 600,000 jobs, which represents about 1.2% to 2.6% in terms of annual rates of change in jobs. So the general observations as we modeled basic income and the way it's funded and the general relationships we were able to tease out is that initial debt funding of a basic income program clearly provides an immediate boost to economic activity. However, the most favorable long-term outcomes that we were able to ascertain are seen with little or no debt funding, in which the programs are entirely funded by households that have the capacity to pay. With or without initial debt funding, GDP is greater when the program is funded entirely by households or households that have the capacity to pay, compared to scenarios where businesses are covering a certain percentage of the costs. The challenge when it comes to businesses is funding options that rely too much on drawing taxation revenues from businesses could hamper economic growth. And part of that is primarily through disincentivizing private investment by businesses in the economy. The potential impacts are greater under the UBI Works program, which is the dividend plus GMI program that we mentioned, when all non-debt costs are covered by households and when the program could result in greater economic activity compared to the GMI program, essentially because you're paying out more money to more people. These general conclusions we tested to varying assumptions regarding different potential price and wage effects, because that is a consideration that needs to be taken into account when you're looking at an increase in, for instance, demand by households that have just received increases in disposable income as they demand more goods and services in the economy. And we found that the conclusions that we've just shared with you are robust under varying different levels of wage and inflation assumptions. What we did do is, given that we don't understand exactly what criteria needs to be met by funding a basic income program, and what I mean by that is that how much economic growth may you want to have in the future versus how much debt, versus how much taxation revenue do you or don't you want to be raising from different parts of the economy. So there is a section within the report where we looked at some criteria just to demonstrate that if society was able to land on some criteria of what a basic income should perform, and what its economic impact, how can we actually make the execution of the basic income program as amenable to economic growth as possible. We considered some criteria in that we actually found a sustainability scenario does exist if the basic income program was to be paid down within 25 years. And middle income or lower income households are all net beneficiaries of the basic income program. And we found that, yes, there is this, we call it a side effect, but there is growth in the economy that exceeds the cost of the basic income program. By the 5th year, the GDP could be up by more than 2.3%, and jobs could be up by more than 430,000 jobs by year 5. And again, the funding solutions, we think about debt, we think about taxation revenues, either from households or businesses. So what we found is under that particular scenario, that basic income costs would be covered by debt, approximately around 50% in the first 12 years. It could range up to 21 years. And that 98% of all the other costs associated with basic income are covered by households, with 2% actually covered by revenues that are drawn from businesses. So as I mentioned, the key conclusion from the report is that while basic income can be justified from a social and equitable grounds, it does have this nice side effect when it's funded correctly. And in that regard, it can be thought of as an investment under certain conditions, in that the economic growth generated from a basic income program could exceed its cost within a reasonably a short time frame. And in this case, it would be less than 25 years. Thank you, and over to you, Jessie.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. We're actually going to take just a quick minute or two to just answer a few questions about Paul's the report and everything. There will be an opportunity for question and answer at the end of this presentation, but we wanted to just do that quick right now. So there are some really interesting questions in the chat right now. One from Ward Smith. He asks, can you explain the difference between monetary policy and fiscal policy and how that impacts basic income funding?
Well, we didn't consider any monetary policy in the analysis. Monetary policy has, we're talking about interest rates, the supply of money in the system and things of that nature. It was held constant throughout the analysis. As we mentioned, we also looked at the question of wages and price effects on the analysis itself. And so we narrowed the analysis down to essentially 3 sources of funding. And as you've touched on, there is fiscal policy in terms of raising taxes from different households with different characteristics or businesses around Canada.
Awesome, thank you. And then there's a couple of other questions. Will UBI go beyond 65 years of age?
Yeah, that's not a question for us.
No. But then there's a couple of questions that are in regards to households and couples. I think this person might be may just need clarification on the plan. They're wondering why individuals getting UBI of $2,000 a month, but then if they cohabitate, couples will only get $2,900, not $4,000. So then
that's more of a question for UBI Works. The programs that we were evaluated were given to us. We're not imparting any preference between programs. Our job was to simply understand the relationships between the execution of those programs and potential relationships on economic impact and the way that changes according to the way a UBI program could be funded.
Awesome.
I had a question for Paul. What is for those who are new to this, what is the basic mechanism by which a basic income would create an increase in economic activity?
Okay, so the basic mechanism is that you're redistributing income and wealth from one group of households to the other. That's essentially how the positive economic impacts tend to raise tend to arrive. Now, clearly, that would be, in the execution or a practical execution of UBI. Would you be able to establish that kind of fiscal policy immediately in the first year? And so you could anticipate that there is going to be debt involved in financing UBI, particularly at the beginning of the UBI itself. But essentially, what drives the economic impacts behind universal basic income is the redistribution of wealth from households that have capacity to pay to households that are, in the lower income groups.
Okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul. And we will have time at the end to do some more question and answer for everybody as well. So next, I would like to introduce Senator Hugh Segal. Senator Hugh has had a long and dedicated career and is a trailblazer in basic income advocacy in Canada. Among his many achievements, he was a driving force behind the Ontario Basic Income Pilot. He's been a longtime advocate for basic income in Canada. Senator Segal was the Chief of Staff under former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. He served on public company boards and recently served a five-year term as principal of Massey College at University of Toronto. He's an adjunct professor and distinguished fellow at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, and in 2003, he was made a member of the Order of Canada. He also told me to keep his intro to less than 10 seconds, and I kind of broke that rule. So I'm very sorry, Hugh, but I'm very excited to hear you speak. I think you're muted.
There we go. I think the expression "I think you're muted" is the most popular expression now on media all around the world. Look, it's an honor to be here for the launch of the CANCEA report because I think it's important that we focus on basic income as a way of generating wealth. The independence of the study, the issues it addresses, the investment return approach it takes to how a basic income would reinforce economic growth and job creation is a very important contribution to the debate that thousands of Canadians are now having about the horrific weaknesses and failures in our social security system from coast to coast. And as we now can see in places like Spain and South Korea in its largest, biggest population province, basic income models are being put into effect for thousands of low-income citizens. And as we see that in the same way as the CERB program introduced in Canada by the federal government because of the inadequacy of existing welfare and EI programs, kept our GDP, gross domestic product, essentially stabilized and ensured that millions of people could pay rent and buy food despite the lockdowns. It is clear that the CANCEA study we celebrate today is really, really necessary. In the past week, in the Senate of Canada, where I don't work and haven't worked for 6 years, Senator Kim Pate of Ontario, in a historic motion to delay the automatic passage of billions of dollars in estimated spending for the coming year because they did not include 1 penny for working age Canadians living in poverty. The results of the study being launched right here were cited and put on the official parliamentary record. And with all the talk about a new Deputy Minister of Finance who starts this week in Ottawa, remarkably bright, able, and experienced Michael Sabia, until now chair of the Federal Infrastructure Bank, what this study underlines is that if new infrastructure that supports efficiency and new technology and environmental sustainability is of immense value, then it's important to remember that human beings, our fellow Canadians, are the most important part of our national infrastructure. And turning our back on those who are living beneath the poverty line is turning our back on what the infrastructure of civility, decency, and fairness really requires for a modern democracy like Canada. Investing in people is really important. The literature and statistics, colleagues, are clear. Poverty is the best predictor of bad health outcomes, early hospitalization, bad educational outcomes for the kids, substance abuse, and trouble with the law, and radically shorter lives for millions of Canadians, all of which cost our economy billions of dollars annually. So investing in reducing the size of poverty in our country is an investment that generates immediate and long-term returns. And because both models of basic income reviewed by the CANCEA study encourage work, as opposed to provincial welfare systems that do the opposite and trap people in poverty, measuring the growth in productivity and economic activity is a vital piece of the policy puzzle. The underlying analysis of this study tells us why legislatures, chambers of commerce, city councils, the Canadian Manufacturers Association, the Conference Board have all tilted in favor of basic income reform to reform the centuries-old and punitive approach to poverty that this country has taken for a very long time. Basic income received and spent by lower income people does not go to free tax-free bank accounts in the Caymans or numbered companies in Panama. It is circulated in the economy, usually in the local economy, in a way that helps local merchants and businesses. In fact, in both Brazil with the Bolsa Familia and South Korea with the cash cards used by recipients, they can only be used in local merchants and stores owned locally. It's because thoughtful governments want local and small business to benefit, because previously welfare poor and working poor have some money through basic income to spend money on their own in stores for things they need. I point out, by the way, colleagues, that South Korea has nothing to learn from Canada on economic growth, technological progress, or productivity. It's a star on all those fronts. So I'm here to celebrate the economic analysis and the economists who structured and wrote the CANCEA report, the accessible language it uses, and the methodical assessment of return on investment. I also congratulate UBI Works, the CEOs for basic income, who commissioned the study. All of these are vital pillars of a better way forward, building back better, of broadening the family table in Canada, and building a stronger economy for the future. I'm delighted to be part of the discussion this morning. Thank you, Jessie.
Thank you so much, Senator Hugh. Thank you for being here. Really, really wonderful to hear you and hear your inspiring words. Now I would like to take the opportunity to introduce Floyd Marinescu. Floyd is the founder of UBI Works and the CEO and co-founder of C4 Media, which provides software development news and events to 1.2 million people online on infoq.com. He also runs QCon, a conference with 8,000 attendees annually around the globe. Floyd is an angel investor and has built teams and businesses around the world. Floyd is a CEO advocate for universal basic income, and he organized 120 Canadian CEOs to endorse basic income in Canada in 2018. Thank you so much, Floyd. Love to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, everyone. Real honored, pleasure to be here, and really honored by the guests that we have here today. So I want to present a bit about what a basic income advocate might take away from the report. Again, keep in mind that CANCEA is an independent firm, and they're simply stating the analysis, the impacts that they see from their model. And UBI Works promotes basic income. So this portion of the talk will be a little more marketing based on what we think is interesting to say about the report for advocates who are trying to make sense of it and what to do with it. Keeping, of course, within the findings of the report, which were completely independent. So it's very important to note that basic income has a number of justifications that go beyond the cold hard economics analysis aspect of it. We already know from existing programs over 17 and growing, actually many experiments were done in the last 50 years around the world. And we've already seen improved graduation rates, fewer hospitalization visits, reduced crime, better physical and mental health, people more active, less food insecurity, better outcomes with regards to childbirth and children's health, better food nutrition. These are things that we already know. But what we haven't been able to talk, and these alone are obviously justifications for why a society might choose to invest in a basic income. These are positive effects, but what we haven't known until now is what are the potential economic impacts of a basic income. And that's what this report talks about. Now we can say that in addition to those benefits, we also know that it can support the prosperity of the Canadian economy. It can be thought of as an investment. This is not the language that we've been using when talking about basic income around the world. Investment language, return on investment language. We know that it can speed up Canada's recovery and grow the economy sustainably, provided that it's funded in the way that CANCEA has shown. But it can do these things. So we can end poverty, restore pathways into the middle class, while also growing the economy. And this is, it can grow the economy even by more than it costs in the long term. And that's really important, because how many programs or investments from government can you say that this is the case for? And now we can talk about basic income in that way. So at UBI Works, we find that, we believe that the report demonstrates that these 5 things are true. It can grow the economy and create jobs, and can be good for business. It is a raise for working Canadians. People think about basic income often in terms of the impact for people on poverty. But we also know that 2/3 of people in poverty are already working. Basic income will raise them out of poverty, so work itself pays. And in the report, you see numerous scenarios that raise the net beneficiaries of the program nearly up into the 80th percentile, meaning that nearly the bottom 80% could be beneficiaries, depending on how it's paid. That's really important. And it can be a self-sustaining investment, meaning that while we're ending poverty, while we're achieving those benefits I mentioned, there is ongoing cumulative and compounding economic growth. An economy, bottom line, an economy with a basic income is larger, can be larger than an economy without one. And that is something that policymakers need to know, that you need to make sure that your policymakers know, that it's part of the debate. So let's go in deeply slightly on some of the interesting findings that we picked out. It can grow the economy and create jobs, adding over $80 billion a year in GDP on different time horizons, I believe it was within 5 years. In short term, it also could achieve the number long term, depending on which program we're talking about. But both programs showed it could add the size of economy, which is roughly equal to the size of our tourism and hospitality economies in Canada right now. Imagine that. Imagine saying, hey, we can end poverty, we can give people the time they need to seek better jobs and better opportunities for themselves, and literally add the equivalent of 2 more industries back to Canada's balance sheet. That's incredible. It can create nearly 600,000 jobs, both in the short term as well as in the long term. This finding was consistent for both programs on different time horizons. That's very exciting. It can be good for business. Money in Canadians' hands who will spend it in their local economies is good for business. These investments would increase demand that could induce businesses to invest $15 billion a year more in private capital investments. That's nearly 3 times more than all venture capital investment in this country. Again, these 2 things are not necessarily connected, but it just gives you a sense of the scale when we talk about what the impact could be. And nearly $32 billion a year added to gross operating surplus to businesses, which is a form of gross profit. That's really important. This could be good for people and good for business. It could be a raise for working Canadians. The economic activity from the program could cause businesses to hire more, spending an additional $32 billion a year in aggregate wages. That's as much as the combined profits of our largest 3 banks. So it's a good thing we got Scotia in there. We missed CIBC. And it's a raise for working Canadians. Again, depending on how it's funded, it could change what the net disposable impact on incomes are. But here we see that here we could actually have a basic income that is actually positive for everyone up until nearly $110,000 of income. That's basically the majority of Canadians could be better off in this program with only small relative contributions for those of higher incomes, except for those who make more than $1 million a year and could afford it. But very important when looking at this graph is that this is not income tax. The report does not specify which tax is or how it's raised. It just shows where does the money come from, and that could be designed through a variety of taxes, many of which are not including income tax. And it shows that it can be a self-sustaining investment. It could grow the economy by more than it costs, creating $22 billion a year in new government revenues from this additional economic activity. That's as much new revenue to the government, not through new tax increases, but through economic growth, as much as all the EI premiums in the country. What could the government do with that money? Well, if debt is used, it could pay it down, or it can invest in other things that Canadians need. So this is an investment. And it can do all this while ending poverty effectively in the country, raising everyone above the market basket measure, including 129,000 single-parent families, 85% of which are female-led, even with considering the Canada Child Benefit. This goes beyond that, in addition to it rather, and also takes us further. So no one is left in poverty in this country. 3.2 million families can be lifted out of poverty. The black line here on the left shows, and the y-axis on the left shows the number of families below the poverty line, and look at the huge number of families, over 3 million, that are just close to it, just above it. Well, with the basic income, the payments extend, pushes everyone over. Everyone's moved over into that pink color above the poverty line, and you can see increases in cash flowing to families at all levels, moving everyone over into a better situation in terms of gross cash. And in terms of the net impacts, I found this graph very interesting from the study, showing the green line is what the people's disposable income would be, and the bottom x-axis is how many people, the first 20% or the last 20%. This shows an income distribution, and the green is what a world would be like without a basic income. And the other two lines are the two programs that were looked at in the study. And it's very important to note that you can see that right around just before the 60th decile, most people are net beneficiaries. And then depending on which program, they can even still be net beneficiaries all the way close to the 80th decile, where you can see that here is where the green line, which is a world without a basic income, ends up being higher, meaning more money for those people after taxes versus without. But even so, you can see the primary impacts, at least in this analysis, would fall on the top 5% of earners, but not fall very much. You know, those lines are still pretty close together. This is a small step for the top 40%, but huge impacts on the bottom 60, with beneficiaries potentially leading up into the 80th. This is a program that would effectively, this is a visualization of what could happen with what we call extreme inequality in this country. It is pretty extreme. Look how far up those lines are going on the far right. The graph can't even capture how high it goes. But we can have a society where no one's in poverty, where everyone, equality of opportunity has been maintained, has been saved. So basic income can be a sustainable investment in Canadians. And now we're seeing, because of this report, incredible headlines like this, where basic income is hailed as key in kickstarting our post-pandemic economy, where it could add 80 billion a year to Canada's economy, create 600,000 jobs. And we're just getting started. We're working hard to circulate this report. And on Monday, Paul will be on BNN Bloomberg. Imagine that, what people would have thought of as a social program being discussed in terms of economic impacts on Bloomberg. That's what this is about, is spreading the word that basic income can be good for the economy as well as is good for business. There is no contradiction there whatsoever. And this is really important, which I'll explain why a bit in the future, a bit later in this talk. So how you can help us spread the word? You know, make sure your member of parliament knows that a basic income can be a sustainable investment. Share with them our link at ubiworks.ca/groweconomy, where they can find the report and find this analysis that I just showed you. And that said, thank you very much. And thank you also to our speakers.
Alrighty, everybody. My name is Alex Spears, and I am a young liberal and basic income advocate. And it is my distinct pleasure to introduce you all to a man named Brett House. Now, you know, I like to do two sides to this introduction. The first is a more personal one, and then I will go into Brett's lengthy credentials. So I've made it my mission in the last year or so to push for basic income and universal basic income within the Liberal Party through policy proposals and advocacy with UBI Works. And sort of as part of that, I came to know Brett, came to work with him on a brief political venture, and you know, came to really admire his take on basic income and his broader intellect. So with that said, Brett House is the Vice President and Deputy Chief Economist at Scotiabank. Earlier in his career, Brett served as Principal Advisor in the Executive Office of the United Nations Secretary General and as an economist at the International Monetary Fund. Brett is a Rhodes Scholar with degrees in economics from the University of Oxford and Queen's University. In addition, he has taught at Oxford University, McGill University, and the University of Cape Town, and has held research roles at Columbia University and Massey College at the University of Toronto. So with that, take it away, Brett.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction, Alex, and it's good to be working with you some more on this really critical issue. It's such a delight to follow the people who have spoken on this webcast already, and I do just want to provide my thanks and highlight the contribution they're making. Floyd and UBI Works, the investment you've made in this, the tireless hours that you put forward, not just in getting the report to this point, but in your advocacy to this stage, have all been critical in keeping UBI front and center in the Canadian policy discussion and debate. So thank you for that. CANCEA, thank you for taking this project on and for doing the research and the detailed modeling that led to the results that are clearly and transparently outlined here. It's been a major contribution, so thank you. Hugh Segal, thank you for the years that you've put into this. Thank you for the advocacy that you've brought to this from not just a conservative perspective, but from the perspective of one of the most impactful Canadians that we've seen in your generation and really in the last 50 years in Canada. Thank you for your tireless efforts. It's great to see Benjamin Tal join me on this webcast, and I think it underscores the point that Jessie made with the spot that CANCEA is going to have with Bloomberg, that this is not a fringe issue. This is not an issue that is limited to advocacy by social justice advocates, social workers, or people who are focused only on the social welfare programs in Canada. It is an economic issue. It is a growth issue. It is a productivity issue, in addition to being a justice issue. And that's why you're seeing people like Ben and myself from Bay Street banks, from economic research groups, that speak to a variety of sectors and stakeholders in the Canadian economy, coming out in support of the work that you're seeing reviewed here today. Lastly, I want to thank Jessie for chairing this today, for documenting the human face of UBI. Today, we're talking a lot about numbers because talking about the numbers is critical to advancing the discussion. But as an economist, I always keep in mind that we're working in a social science space, and social is about people. And Jessie, you're documenting effectively the faces of the people that UBI affects. And we should always keep in mind that everything we're discussing today is about the well-being of people. That said, my role as an economist in the discussion today is to go through the numbers. And that's what I'm going to do, because I want to give you context for the report, context for the UBI discussion, and some ammunition for the discussion, debates, and things that you'll see in the press as this goes forward, so that you can make sense of them, think about them critically, and formulate arguments that reflect your experience and the modeling and evidence that's being presented today in a way that's compelling to keep this discussion moving forward. First off, on the numbers, we are looking at what are truly large numbers in terms of the impact from a potential UBI or guaranteed basic income scheme. At up to $80 billion a year in additional GDP, that puts the impact of a guaranteed basic income or universal basic income on par with two other major policy proposals that have received a lot of attention this year and in the recent past. First off, we at Scotiabank have been advocating for more concerted and deeper efforts to ensure a universal childcare system is created in this country, as not just a measure to ensure that we have greater and preserve greater participation of women in the labor force, but again, as an economic issue. As we reopen, as we continue to grapple with the pandemic in the meantime, we are seeing substantial bottlenecks develop in the economy because people are being forced to choose between looking after their children and working. And therefore, childcare as an economic issue is critical to not only spurring the recovery out of the pandemic this year, but ensuring that we have higher rates of growth and better outcomes for everyone going forward. The IMF and other studies have estimated that a proper childcare system would add 4% of GDP to the Canadian economy over time, just as a universal basic income would do. The other big possible impact on Canadian GDP that is mooted as having about a 4% impact is greater free trade, greater labor mobility, greater opportunities to business between the provinces in Canada. And so I mentioned both of these because it also is estimated at about a 4% of GDP impact by places like the IMF and other independent analysts. So, you know, UBI stands head and shoulders with other big policy priorities that could have a substantial and really immediate impact on Canadian growth and human well-being. There's no question we don't have to look at the modeling, though we should in this report, to know that cash transfers to low-income Canadians have a positive impact on their well-being and a positive impact on Canadian economic growth and broader well-being. We've had two big national experiments that complement the smaller pilots that we saw in Ontario more recently and in Manitoba some years ago. First off, over the last 6 years, we've seen a big increase in the benefits paid to working families through the Canada Child Benefit, which has also been stepped up. That has been instrumental in bringing hundreds of thousands of Canadian families out of poverty. As Hugh mentioned, we've also had the CERB and its successors over the last 9 months of the pandemic in Canada. And we've seen that the impact of cash transfers to low-income working people in some cases, in other cases, depending on the nature of the transfer to those who are not working, has been massively important in preserving Canadian economic activity and well-being this year particularly. The old concern, you know, amongst some that people would blow conditional or cash transfers, whether they're conditional or not, on the proverbial pop and chips has been shown, at least in the aggregate, to be a completely misfounded fear. In fact, what Canadians have done has been to massively boost their savings, bring down some of their debt burdens, and use funds for things like childcare, training, and other basic needs. In fact, you know, it's worth, as I mentioned in our virtual UBI March, setting cash transfers to low-income people in the context of promises that have been made for decades, that as we liberalize the Canadian economy, opened up labor markets, opened up capital markets, and opened up trade with the rest of the world, we acknowledge that some people would be adversely affected, even as it grew the pie of the Canadian economy as a whole. And we did say all the way along, from the Canada Free Trade Agreement with the United States in 1988 to the recent redevelopment or renovation of NAFTA, that we would ensure transfers would be made to help people retrain, relocate, and participate in the new opportunities that freer markets would open up. We've never made entirely good on those promises. And so a universal basic income isn't just about coping with the after effects or the current effects of the pandemic. It's also making good on promises that have been decades in their satisfaction. It's really clear that some of the old ways of helping low-income households and kickstarting growth aren't going to be entirely the solution to this year's recession and recovery. In the past, you know, we've looked at things like physical infrastructure to kickstart growth, shovel-ready projects, and spending on capital goods that would produce benefits over a long period of time. But we know most of the people who are out of work right now aren't civil engineers, and in many cases aren't construction workers who would normally be involved in large projects. They're people in the service sector where physical distancing is difficult and where getting people back to work is going to remain a long-term difficult project. Those people are going to need support for a significant period of time. And as Andrew Yang mentioned, Many of those jobs aren't coming back anytime soon, and they're going to need help transitioning into other sectors. That's what a universal basic income can help to do. Now, most of the debate around a universal basic income, as I mentioned, especially in the context of the Canada Child Benefit and the CERB, isn't about whether it can boost growth. And it isn't about whether it can improve the economic well-being of low-income people. It's usually about, can it be paid for? And here, despite the really excellent modeling in this report, I do want to introduce a little bit of caution to our rhetoric. I'm not sure that it advances our political cause when we say UBI, or a guaranteed basic income, will pay for itself. Because even in this very sympathetic independent report, it pays for itself over an extended period of time, over what can be up to 25 years, depending upon the assumptions that we employ. And so I don't think we should accept the rhetorical bar that for universal basic income to be a positive thing for Canada, it has to pay for itself, or it has to pay for itself in the next 5 to 10 years or in the cycle of a single government. We don't ask that of the physical infrastructure that we're investing in through things like the new Canada Infrastructure Bank that are the priority for the new Deputy Minister of Finance. We shouldn't expect something greater out of universal income, basic income, than those projects. Our bar should be, does it pay for itself in terms of broader returns to the economy over time, some of which generate higher taxes, but not all of which are going to lead to tax revenue perfectly offsetting the costs of a universal basic income. It is important, as the report notes, that there is a timing consistency here. The costs are going to be bigger up front, and the benefits are going to be delivered more gradually over time. We shouldn't try to sweep that under the table. We should be clear about that, and clear that some of the big benefits from a universal basic income are not limited to things that we can monetize or identify in monetary terms clearly up front. One of the greatest benefits of this type of policy reform is the volatility reduction that it provides to low-income households so that they can plan over time. They can undertake education. They can change the precarity of the housing that they're involved in. They can support parts of their extended family or friend network in ways that they wouldn't be able to otherwise able to do, because they know what's coming. They know that they're going to have this basic level of support. I think what I would underscore is a few complementary policy ideas that we can inject into our discussions advocating for and defending a universal basic income framework. First off, is that it is clear that inflation and inflationary effects from these cash transfers are a non-issue right now. When we look over the last decade or so, we have consistently undershot, not overshot, the Bank of Canada's inflation target. And that's because we've faced persistent weak demand, which has translated into weak investment by companies. The biggest thing we can do to try to boost growth and actually get inflation back toward the target is put more cash in people's pockets. We also are in a situation right now where we have the lowest funding costs or debt costs in our lifetimes. Interest rates are at record lows, and there's been a bit of a debate over what this should mean for debt management by the Canadian government. It should mean much longer durations and maturities in the debt that we issue to lock in those low costs, because if we do so, it makes the calculus on the time required for something like universal basic income to pay for itself that much simpler and easier and more manageable. Lastly, we did talk a little bit earlier about what the bar is for making universal basic income an economically sound idea in the macro sense. Not so much in terms of how does it impact people's lives, but can we finance it over time? Here, people like David Dodge, the past governor of the Bank of Canada, suggested that any spending and investment should be framed in terms of, does it generate growth rates that exceed the interest rate we would have to pay on the related debt? And I think this report absolutely makes good on the notion that universal basic income can satisfy that criterion. It's a key criterion for debt sustainability, and it doesn't imply that it has to pay for itself in a way that we don't expect other investments to do in just a few years. It says it needs to pay for itself gradually over time so that our capacity to bring down our debt in concurrent ways with our spending remains in place. And so those are a few things I think we need to keep in mind as we go forward and push for universal basic income in a way that's practical, pragmatic, and pursues greater justice for low-income people. I think it complements as well other things that we should always keep in mind as creating the space for universal basic income. We should keep pursuing higher minimum wages, a progressive tax system that actually does ensure greater equality after tax, and we should ensure that the government makes good on its promise in the September throne speech to move tax filing in Canada to a free and automatic system so that some of the delivery models for universal basic income become simpler, easier, and the foundations for them are already in place. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I so look forward to the discussion with the great questions we're seeing coming in and the people that Floyd, Jessie, and UBI have brought together. It's a privilege to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brett. Some people have asked, why do we, on a talk or a presentation about basic income, are we hearing from economists and bankers? Because we're about to hear from another banker in a moment. Well, the answer is simple. UBI Works' mission is to make basic income an election issue in this country. Politicians are accountable. The number one accountability is to grow the economy, because it's widely understood that economic growth and productivity growth leads to prosperity for all, eventually, maybe not as fast as we'd like, so that's why we want a basic income. But politicians listen to people like Brett. They listen to people like Benjamin Tal from CIBC, who we're about to hear from in a moment. So that's why we focus so much on unveiling the truth, the potential of the economic macro impacts on basic income, which until now have simply never been seen or known. Like, there have been small studies in different countries. I saw a study that the Bolsa Familia in Brazil, which is like the Canada Child Benefit, adds $2 of GDP for every dollar invested. We did a study like that here in Canada on the Canada Child Benefit, which had similar results. So we need to make widely known that a basic income can be good for the economy. That's why you're hearing from bank economists and not social workers in this presentation, because we already know the impacts on health. So that said, I'm also Benjamin Tal, who's the Deputy Chief Economist at CIBC. Couldn't make it today, he's in transit, but I recorded a Q&A with him yesterday, specifically for this call. So it's really a pleasure, in addition to Brett, thank you, Brett, so much, to hear from Brett's colleague from CIBC, giving a slightly different, but actually quite similar take. So Alex, let's go.
Ben, you've been covering the problems with the economy and the labor market to which basic income could be part of the solution. What are these problems that you're concerned about?
I think that we have a major mismatch in the labor market. We have people without jobs and jobs without people. And by the way, this is not just about uneducated people. This is much more than that. Canada is the most educated country in the OECD in terms of the number of people going to universities. But we're also the #1 country in terms of the number of educated people that live in poverty. So we cannot translate those degrees into good jobs and income. And that's the issue. And that's why we have to deal with it. This is not just about education. It's much more than that. But clearly, we have to fix this problem because it does impact the overall productivity of the economy and therefore the lifestyle of everybody in Canada.
You've also pointed out that growth in our labor market seems to be happening primarily in low-income jobs and low-quality jobs. What's going on there?
We have something that we developed a few years ago. We call it the Employment Quality Index, because when you look at the media, the focus is always on the number of jobs created, good or bad. Now we have to focus on what kind of jobs. The quality of employment is really as important as the number of new jobs created on a given month. And you look at the quality of employment over time, and the direction is very clear. It's down, 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 namely more people working in low-wage occupations, the gig economy, and clearly COVID-19 has exposed this vulnerability of the labor market, something that we have to deal with. And I think that's what you guys are trying to do at this point.
You have mentioned that crises are always a trend accelerator. What are the trends you're most concerned of?
COVID-19 was a trend accelerator, and there are many, many of them that were accelerated. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. One of the bad ones is the growing gap between income, wealth in Canada, namely a situation in which this gap has been widening before the crisis, and now it's widening faster. Again, the crisis has exposed the vulnerability of the system, and we know from the experience in the US over the past 4 years that if you don't do anything about it, it will become much larger. This is an issue that we have to deal with. It's really the right thing to do. And again, this is a step in the right direction.
What impact do you see automation having on the Canadian labor market?
Yes, when you read the popular press, the narrative is that automation will lead to reduced employment. Now, this is not the case. The opposite is the case. In fact, automation will increase employment, but the type of employment is the issue. And that's why my focus is also on education, because we are seeing the Canadian society changing in a very significant way, and we don't see education changing in the appropriate way. Namely, the labor market is changing at the speed of light, and the education system is behaving like nothing happened. And we are really looking at the economy being transformed into something different. And we are in a transition period, and that's why so many people are unable to cope. We need something to help them and to buy time until we find the right way to deal with the new economy. Education is a very important part of it, but in between, we have to buy time to allow those people that cannot survive in the new economy to be able to live.
What is the number one problem you're worried about, and how is basic income part of the solution?
I believe that the rising income inequality, wealth inequality in Canada is the number one issue facing our society currently and in the future. We must find a solution. I believe that basic income must be at least the beginning of the discussion about this solution. And this is extremely important for policymakers. Remember, the solution is not about transfer of money. It's about providing people with the ability to participate in the new economy and enhance the economic multiplier of every solution.
So what about this report? Did you find it exciting? What's new about this report from your point of view?
Well, I've been looking at UBI for a while, and in my opinion, this is the most comprehensive report dealing with the situation, with the way to finance it and the implications of this issue. I believe also that it illustrates the fact that it's not really about the charity. It's not about transferring income. It's more than that. It's enhancing the overall ability of the economy to grow, and therefore productivity that will enhance everybody's else standard of living. That's why I think this report is important. It must be a starting point for any policymaker that is interested in solving the problem. I don't know if this is the solution, but this is clearly the number one step in terms of finding a solution.
For me, something that was interesting about this report is it shows that basic income is not just a social program, it's an economic reform. It could be thought of as an investment. I'm curious how you see that, this notion that basic income could be an investment, a sustainable one at that.
Yes, I think this is a very important point. The issue of UBI as an investment as opposed to charity or transfer of income to individuals, because we have to remember the magnitude of the problem is significant. It impacts the psyche of people and the ability of the economy to grow. So it's a productivity issue. And therefore, I suggest that if you deal with this basic problem, you enhance the ability of the economy to grow. Overall productivity at this point, given this gap, is suboptimal. If you enhance the ability of the economy to grow, everybody benefits, because productivity is the number one factor impacting standard of living, not only of the poor, but everybody. And that's why I believe that the economic multiplier of this solution is actually going to be enhanced and help the economy long term.
Yeah, in fact, The report only looks at the econometrics impact of additional money flowing into the economy through lower income households, increasing the velocity of money. But it doesn't look at perhaps the most important things, is people's capacity to innovate. What people will do when they can take risks. And I think right now we need to unlock Canada's ability to take risks, because only innovation has created wealth consistently throughout history of humanity. And
Absolutely.
I'm very excited about basic income.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Benjamin. Really appreciate it.
Good luck with everything. And yeah, I'm sure it will be great.
So there you heard it. A deputy chief economist from a major Canadian bank saying that basic income should be the first step in any wider solution to economic reform, saying that there's an economic multiplier associated with this program, that this is not about charity. This is a much bigger things are at stake. So thank you to Benjamin, thank you to Brett. Brett, do you have any comments on that? Sound like you wanted to say something.
Well, I think there are many elements of what Benjamin noted that are mainstream ideas that really don't require any special justification, but they sometimes get lost in these discussions. We know very well that putting $1 of income into a low income person's pocket is going to have a bigger impact on spending, consumption, and economic growth than $1 in a high income household's pocket. That's a truism. So, that piece of all of this shouldn't be controversial at all, but it still requires repeating again and again. And I was glad to see him make that point.
Great. Next we have Jessie. Thanks, Jessie.
Thank you so much, Floyd, and thank you everybody who's spoken so far. This has been incredible, and I feel very honored and privileged to be here with this group of experts and economists. I joke around, but when I was in university, I failed Economics 101, yet here I am with some of the most prominent people in the country talking about very, very important and life-changing economic issues. So I feel very honored to be here. And the reason that I am here is that I actually have a lived experience. I was on the Ontario Basic Income Pilot, and so I received a basic income. At the time before I received a basic income, I had 4 jobs, and they were all very low wage, gig work, contract jobs with no protections, no rights whatsoever. And it was just a very stressful and exhausting existence. And I was working all of these jobs in an effort to try and build my business as a photographer. And I really struggled to do so because like Floyd and Benjamin Tal said in that video, just about the idea of innovation and being able to take risks and being able to have the ability to take that risk. It costs money. Every single business costs money, and people don't think about the cost in time that it takes. So I take that time, I invest in my business, but maybe I'm not making any money right away, and I still need to pay for my food and pay for rent and all the other things that people need to pay for. So I was just finding it was impossible. But then when I was on basic income, I had that time and I had that ability to take that risk. And when I took that risk, I found that my business grew, and I found that I had more time to put in that business, and that I was booking projects and booking photo shoots. I was marketing myself. Everything was growing. I actually started developing a very robust business plan for a very great idea. And then and when I projected and did all my financial projections, I actually predicted that the Ontario Basic Income Pilot that was supposed to be 3 years long, I would have been off the pilot 2 years in, because I would have been making enough money off of my business that I wouldn't have needed a basic income anymore. Obviously, that didn't happen because the government, there was a newly elected Conservative government that, despite making an election promise to keep the basic income pilot, they actually broke that promise and canceled the basic income pilot very, very abruptly, with no reason that had any basis in quantifiable evidence or fact. I was furious. Hell hath no fury, like a photographer scorned, I suppose. So I determined, I made the very, very heartbreaking decision to put my business on the shelf because I realized I could not do this anymore. And I went off to protest the government's cancellation of basic income. And how I did that is that I wanted to hear stories. And I wanted to thank Brett for saying that my stories have had impact. I really appreciate it. So what I had done was that I went around to find as many basic income recipients as I could. I asked them a simple question. I asked, what were you using basic income for? I gave them a piece of cardboard and a Crayola marker. It felt very juvenile and odd, but those are the materials I had. And people wrote their stories on their sign and held them up for me, and I took their portraits. My goal was to get 50 portraits of basic income recipients. I was able to get 70 portraits. And just for you right now, I'm going to share a few of these portraits and see like the real life application of how a basic income positively impacts businesses, positively creates growth, and positively impacts the economy. So if everybody can see that there. UBI, among many other benefits, has provided me with a chance to get to work. She lives in Hamilton and then she commutes to Toronto. So basic income enabled her to pay for her commute. She was able to look for more work in Toronto and able to develop her business. Grateful. UBI has made it possible to afford a means of transportation, to eat, and to be able to study as a full-time student. Currently, I have 30 hours a week of unpaid placement. I'm a student and trying to work part-time around that schedule. Before UBI, I couldn't afford to travel to school, placement, or work, and there is no public transportation in my area. UBI has alleviated stress from my busy life. Please save universal basic income. So this kind of investment enabled her to be able to pursue her education and pursue her placement, which will ultimately lead to a better job and better economic input and returns for her. Like I said, I failed economics 101, but I understand this. Basic income has allowed me to support charities in Ontario that are special to me. I've been able to support Ontario farmers by purchasing their products. I've been able to eat more healthy with the extra income. I've been able to, for the first time, save money for my future. You've taken my security and future away. And I like this picture in particular because she's specifically saying that she's supporting charities in Ontario and she's supporting Ontario farmers. So her basic income, this investment by the government is going directly to impacting local people right on the grassroots level. I bought a car and I was going to learn how to drive at the age of 60. That would have given me the freedom to spend quality time with my family. I bought a gym membership, locked in for 1 year. She's supporting local markets and eating better. She references a grocery store called the Mustard Seed, which is a co-op grocery store in Hamilton, Ontario. I can buy my granddaughters meaningful gifts. I can take better care of my overall well-being. And she was also frustrated because there was no indication of any sort of reason or backup plan or any sort of remedy or solution to canceling the basic income when it happened. But you see that just that basic income made her make significant purchases that affected positive business and local economy. This is Louis and Lana. They are standing here in the shop that they used basic income to build. This is their business. It's called Fresh Fuel. It's in downtown Lindsay, Ontario. Basic income help us further develop our business by easing the financial stress of bills at home and raising 4 young children. They have 4 kids and they're able to use basic income to develop a business that has had a beautiful and positive impact on the economy in Lindsay, has had an impact on their life. Their business has won awards. I've been to their business. Their food is really, really good. And I highly recommend it if you're in Lindsay. But you see that there are tangible stories. We've talked a lot about numbers and a lot of the statistics, which is very, very important. And I don't in any way want to diminish the importance of that. But then we see the practical application of it and the practical application of how these people, and myself included, used a basic income, not to just sit around on our ass playing video games all day, but we built businesses, we went to school, we invested in the local economy around us, and everything improved as a whole as a society. And that's why I believe in basic income. And that's why I've really changed my life to fight for this. That's why I made the heartbreaking decision to put my business on the shelf so I could fight for basic income, because I believe in this and believe that when we do this, this benefits all of us as a society, and everybody benefits. And I am very excited about this report. I'm very honored to be here and speak to this and be able to speak to the real life stories of this, because I know it works. It's worked in my life. So thank you again. And thank you for this really great opportunity. And I believe right now we're going to be taking some questions. So I'm very happy to help moderate those questions. So I'm just going to take a quick look here.
And if any panelists had questions or comments on each other's remarks, now's also a good time.
Certainly, yes. Maybe let's open it up if any panelists want to ask anything or say anything first, and then we'll open it up to everybody.
I just wanted to say something to the bankers who are with us. You know, we are all very comfortable when the Bank of Canada, the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, when there's a crisis like COVID, or when there was the credit crunch back in 08-09, creates the kind of monetary policy that ensures liquidity, that financial markets, institutions, have the money they need to manage. During the credit crunch back in 08-09, while the federal government did not bail out the banks in the normal course, what Central Mortgage and Housing did was buy a portfolio of perfectly good mortgages from the banks that were performing. They were excellent. So the banks could get $362 billion in cash for those mortgages, which they then had to have the liquidity they needed to deal with small business loans and car loans and making sure there's cash in the machine when you go with your card to get some, not because they were in any difficulty per se, but because credit had dried up around the world and getting liquidity was problematic. So what I think is really instructive from that is if we create liquidity as a global priority for the big players, understandably, why aren't we creating liquidity for the people at the low end of the spectrum? Because they too have needs and they're part of our society and they deserve a seat at the family table. So I think we have some of that in the past to draw on. And the one thing I'd say about Michael Sabia, who's a great guy, by the way, bright and able, is that when he was the ADM in finance and created the GST back in the Mulrooney era, he also created the GST low income tax credit, which was automatic. I used to say to my graduate students, file your taxes. And they would say, well, we don't have any money. I said, that's exactly why you should file your taxes, because the federal government will automatically put money in your account. So the sales tax doesn't take too much of your income as it expands across the country. So there are some lessons in the past, and I'm grateful to both bankers for having dealt with some of those issues today.
Well, if I may, I would just build on that by saying what we've seen from the 2008 financial crisis and from the experience of the lockdowns this year is that creating abundant liquidity with low interest rates that makes it easy for businesses and households to borrow is a necessary condition to getting us through difficult times, but it's not sufficient, particularly now when we've seen households boost savings massively and cut back in some areas on spending, and business over the last decade in Canada has consistently not invested at the rates that most of us in the economic modeling world would have expected when borrowing is so cheap. We need to do more. We need to ensure that low-income people have money in their pockets to create consumer demand, and that creates the conditions that build confidence for businesses to invest in additional capacity, which then leads to jobs, which is essentially the virtuous circle that we like to talk about in economics. And that only happens when they see the demand for their goods and services and they see lower risk around undertaking that debt. And that's not just the case for businesses, but obviously it's the case for households too. There are, a variety of loan products that are available right now that households in trouble aren't taking because, or small businesses that are run by just a few people aren't taking because they don't know what things are going to look like 6 months or a year from now. So cheap money isn't a sufficient condition to sustain growth. It's a necessary condition in difficult times, but it needs to be complemented by things that take risk down, provide incentives for businesses to invest, and allow people, particularly low-income people, to spend. And that's where universal basic income can be an important part of the policy discussion to build on the remarks that Hugh just made.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Brett, and thank you, Hugh. Does anybody else from the panel want to make any last remarks? Okay, we have a few questions from Dana Bowman, and this is specifically to Floyd. She's wondering, are business and companies open-minded and more accepting of the need of basic income in light of COVID and or the need from the public?
Well, I can't speak for all other businesses, but we have seen, I mean, I do know other business owners. I know business owners that have been saved, frankly, by some of the recovery benefits that the government was very quick to move, particularly restaurant owners. So thank goodness that we had that. And I'll tell you, as a business owner, I would rather have slightly higher taxes when I'm successful, but still have a good business, still be able to predict revenue, still be able to predict customers. Because if I can't see revenue growth, I can't justify investments. And that's more important to me. It's like the business itself is the work and the profit it creates. And I found the tail end, I have a successful businessman have to pay a bit more for society to function well. By all means, that's a good thing. That's a good trade-off. I think a lot of business owners have seen themselves in the experience of precarity, including working Canadians who never would have seen themselves as needing government support, that suddenly found themselves needing it at exactly the right time. And that's what a basic income is all about. So I would say, yes, this pandemic has obviously increased awareness and support for basic income. We can see that in the polling.
Thank you, Floyd. And then this question is for anybody who would like to answer. How does the Bank of International Settlements, like the IMF, WTO, and the World Bank are part of this, and other private institutions like Scotiabank affect the potential of national banking in a public credit structure? To be more direct, the monetary financial structure seems impotent for large-scale and longer-term national investment opportunities like UBI.
Well, I might come in on this being an alumnus of the IMF and the World Bank and working at Scotiabank right now in the financial system, with a view that actually, the financial system is not holding up recovery or rebuilding. In fact, interest rates and the availability of borrowing couldn't be lower and couldn't be more abundant than it is right now. And I'm going to come back to the comments I just made earlier. The problem is that businesses and individuals see too much risk ahead and don't see clear opportunities to invest in either creating businesses or spending because of that risk. And so it's an environment in which fiscal policy, spending by government, can come in and help reduce the perceptions of risk and put money into the pockets of people who are likely to spend it. And it is a classic moment in 100 years of economic theory that would say we clearly need more fiscal support for the economy right now, because the financial system and the cost of borrowing isn't what's holding us back right now. It's those risks, those uncertainties about the future, and worries in both households and businesses that they're not going to be able to pay the bills. And I just want to dovetail with that. There were a few questions I saw in the chat. If you saw my eyes going up and down, I was trying to get a sense of what people are talking about out there in the audience. There are a few questions about why we're talking about growth so much and why universal basic income could help growth when, on the one hand, growth has been environmentally destructive, it's used up resources, it's accelerated climate change and degraded a whole lot of biosystems. That's certainly one side of growth. The other side of growth that boosts GDP, boosts economic activity, in an economy is increased productivity. You can either grow by putting more inputs into the economy or by using them more efficiently. And I see UBI as one of the ways that increases the efficiency of growth, increases our productivity, and that's ultimately good for the environment. It's good for nature and good for all of us. So that's why I focus on growth here.
Thank you so much, Brett, and thank you, everybody. I feel like we have had such a great discussion here and such wonderful presentations, and I know my mind is just bursting with all of this wonderful information. I would just like to take the opportunity to invite Floyd to just say some closing remarks.
Thank you. And before I do that, Paul, I guess, as the author of the report, do you want to make any closing remarks? Put you on the spot.
Well, look, it's, I think that listening to both Brett and Benjamin, I think that they've cast the results of the report well, in that, you know, to justify or to argue for basic income is not about economic growth. It has its own justifications. And just, you know, from what the report is showing is that the economic growth that it could spurn could exceed its costs. And when we talk about sustainability, we're talking about can the government actually balance its books over time by supporting a basic income? And the answer is, it appears to be yes. And we've modeled this, looking at it in many different ways, in many different scenarios, and we've come to understand what those conditions are. The other point I'll make, listening to both Brett, Benjamin, and others, is we also need to think about a basic income and redistribution in the context of the financialization of our economies. What we mean by that is the asset inflation and the availability of capital and cheap money, what actually goes into the percentage that goes into the real economy has been diminishing over years. And recently, with the current crisis, you'll see that that will have accelerated. And so you might view basic income as timely, and being able to borrow from or take from aspects of the financialization of the economy in which funds aren't being put into the real economy, whereas basic income actually promotes that idea.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I want to do closing remarks. I will repeat something I said earlier for those who perhaps weren't here. But the discussion on basic income has usually been framed as an anti-poverty measure, a welfare reform, some sort of charity, something that's for people in poor circumstances. So you may be wondering, why has this talk been so much about economics? Why have we had deputy chief economists from 2 major Canadian banks here and not social workers talking about the plight of people in poverty? Well, it's because we believe that basic income is an election issue. A party will have to run on it and win. And politicians listen to the economist community, listen to the banking community. Their number one accountability is to grow the economy, to increase productivity. So that is what we're trying to do here, is by revealing the truth that basic income can grow the economy and making that part of the debate. It's been a missing part of the debate that it now is available in Canada with this very detailed and really good study, thanks to CANCEA. So what we need to do is make it so that one day a party has to run on basic income, or they know they won't win. Like, that is the future UBI Works is trying to create. And we think it's urgent because technology is transforming the labor market faster than the speed of light. You've heard Benjamin Tal say that, faster than education system can cope with, leaving people behind with no means of catching up. It's kind of a crime that 2/3 of people in poverty are working. What does that say about our assumptions about how the economy is supposed to work, about the assumptions about how jobs are supposed to work? It should be alarming that after our last recovery, we experienced the greatest and longest expansion, positive expansion in the history of capitalism, with nearly full employment, while people are still going into greater into debt. More and more people are living check to check and have less free time, working people. What is going on here? Something's got to give. So we say, UBI Works says that the economy is broken because wages aren't rising as fast as cost of living. A key reason is that modern technology is cheaper than workers and is disrupting the tasks we do at work faster than our education system and labor market can catch up with. And this is causing a huge concentration of wealth at the top to the detriment to all of us. Where in Canada, 43% of all the wealth is owned by the top 5%, and the bottom 40% of Canadians own only 1% of the wealth. Benjamin Tal said this is the #1 problem facing our society, this extreme wealth inequality, and that basic income should be the first step in a wider solution to try and address the way the economy works. And to quote my friend Andrew Yang, UBI must be part of the solution because we need a mechanism to establish a mechanism by which we can all be beneficiaries from advancements in technology. And why not do it directly with cash as a start? Opening up possibilities for all of us to aspire to greater things in life, to pursue our potential, whatever our own unique expression of our potential may be, by being able to make long-term plans because we know basic needs are met. So in short, as technology moves society forward, basic income ensures no one is left behind. And that is the mission of UBI Works, is to spread these ideas. On that note, I'm very grateful to CANCEA for this report, grateful to Benjamin Tal and Brett House from CIBC and Scotiabank for lending their input and their names to this. Thank you also for Hugh Segal for being here and lending your credibility and your long history in this work, and the rest of the team at UBI Works. The more we show that basic income is a necessary recovery measure, with the proof of reports like this and statements from people like this that politicians listen to, the more we can de-risk this issue for any future party to run on, because every party has to be accountable for growing the economy and creating jobs. And this is the link that has now been established in this country. So please join us in making this the defining election issue in Canada one day. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Hope to see you soon. And it's a wrap.